I used to love the we would get training in special security forces on things that we would never do. And if we did them, then like we knew that like if we got deployed and we went into a combat situation, we would get way more training than this one PowerPoint hour-long presentation they're giving us. So why are you giving us this PowerPoint presentation about advancing or like patrolling or L ambushes or whatever it is? Because we don't need that here. Why are we getting the training now? And there seems to be a lot of training in the military that's like that, where they have to fill time slots, and so they train you with
Oh,
stuff that
oh,
you're not
hell
going to
It
yeah.
need to
comes out
know.
like
You know, we used to do in ROTC when we had time and nothing else to do. They would go over Zodiac training. Zodiac is little
Right.
rubber boats.
Right.
Like we'd
Right.
be going over amphibious operations. We're in ROTC. What do we need to know about Zodiac training?
100%. Yeah.
Drop troopers fall through an endless sky. Military sound and science fiction contest. Reaction in the system on fire. Military sound and science fiction contest. Short stories every Wednesday. Military sound and fiction contest. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science, science fiction contest.
All right. Welcome to the podcast. Today we are talking about training. And if you've been in the military, you've done some training. There are a lot of people when they think about joining the military, like everybody has that guy or gal they've talked to at the bar that was like, I'd join, but I'd punched out, they kicked me out because I'd punch out the drill sergeant, you know.
Yeah.
So everybody, basic training is the bar, but then going on and using training later in story as a way to a lot of times set up a problem and then refer to it later in the book, is just a great way to bring about like character resolution and things like that. So
Well, it's almost a trope in a lot of Space Marine type series, especially to have boot camp, basic training to start out there.
Jay Allen did something really cool with his first series, his first book, Marine, I think is what it's called, and it they have like a lottery to get into the military, and his life sucks so bad in their planets, and that followed the main character through that the whole shtick. Well, I really like that.
well, I think basic training especially is you've got that transition, from civilian life to military life. And when you're writing a story, it also is a good shortcut to set up the rules of the world, like how this military works, what it looks like, what the weapons are that they use. Like you can ease the reader in through all of it. But yeah, people have read that so many times that making it interesting is hard. And I'm trying to think back to Drop Trooper. Like you didn't do a lot of straight up basic training, but you did spend some time describing how the armored suits work. Like I'm thinking in particular about the warrant officer character that imparts a lot of information about the armored suits that then comes into play later. But I mean, Rick, is that something that because you followed the whole trope of like having a character that's, go to jail, go to war, and, it transforms his life. But was that a thing that what made you choose to do that for Drop Trooper?
Well, it's kind of funny because I had written about every other aspect of that war, like commandos, pilots, Marine, just boots on the ground Marines without armor. And the only thing that I had written in the overall description of the war that I hadn't written a book about was the guys who are the main grunts, the drop troopers, the ones who basically did all the real dirty work. And when it came time to write that, I had used a lot of different character types in those other services, I guess you'd call it, branches of service. And I'm like, I haven't used it's very tropey, it's very cliched in a lot of ways. the guy who's in big trouble and has to join the military or go to jail. So that's kind of why I chose that route. But I mean, I tried to make it a little bit more involved and interesting than just somebody, getting in trouble for a bar fight, where he accidentally killed someone or something like that. But I mean, and once you get into your regular boots on the ground Marine, you've got to do boot camp. I mean, it's almost required in military science fiction that you have to have a boot camp scene, at least one. I actually had people come when I did the recon series, which is about a force recon Marine. They're more not quite special forces, but they're more, elite than the regular drop troopers. I got comments from readers that, oh, he didn't do the boot camp scenes. And I'm used to seeing the boot camp scenes, and I didn't do that because I didn't really want to. As a reader, I'm not usually that interested in reading the boot camp scenes, but I tried to. I mean, I felt compelled to put them in, so I tried to make them something that would be meaningful and resonate with the rest of the book. So.
I kind of go the opposite direction with boot camp in my writing, just because, like Rick said, they're in almost every story, and I feel like unless that's the point of your story, sometimes it can get really repetitive in terms of what the people are going through, because whether you're in the Army or the Air Force or the Navy or the Marines, there's a lot of things that are different about basic in terms of what you have to do, either physically or just functionally to graduate basic. But the essence of all of them is the same. It's breaking a person down, stripping their individuality away, and forcing them to grow into the machine that they need them to be. And I don't know, there's only so many times that I can read about that. And I don't know if that's just because I write it or because I lived through it. But if I'm reading Mil Sci-Fi, for instance, reading like Grimm's War, I don't need to know their struggles through basic training to follow their story as naval officers or ensigns or ratings or whatever they are. And I know fundamentally that they all went through basic training. I know they went through that experience. So I don't necessarily need that for the story, but if there are events in their training that affect them later on, or like you said, set up something else that happens in the story, then I could see it being important. I can't remember. There was a story that I read. Was it Old Man's War? Have you guys ever read Old Man's War?
Mm-hmm.
Old Man's War, I think they had a sequence where they were doing some kind of training. And it
I
was
read one book by Scalzi and I hated it so much I just decided not to ever read anything by him again.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's not my favorite, but I remember it taking up a portion of the book and just wanting to get past it to get on to all the rest.
I'm trying to remember, because in Old Man's War they put them in the new bodies, right? So that felt like that was a big part of it, was the transition to the bodies,
right? And
I
that's
feel
true.
like that was why he did that.
Yeah. And like in Starship Troopers, well, I haven't read the book, but in the movie, the sequence of the training, the stuff that happens in there.
You just admit
like,
that out loud on a podcast?
I have never read the book.
On a military science fiction podcast.
Never read the book.
Jeez.
I don't have any plans to read it.
They have it on audiobook now.
Darcy Bray just did it on audio.
Narrated by was R.C. Bray, right?
It's R.C. Bray. I've never read
buy
it.
you a copy of it and give it to you.
I don't know. I just have never. Everybody always talks about it. I've never felt the need to read it.
Well, the book is. This is a good tangent we should talk about, but I mean, the book is very different than people's perceptions, I think.
Sure, I'm sure it is, and everybody says it's different from. It's not anything like the movie, which is fine.
Oh no, it's nothing like the movie.
That's not necessarily true. There are aspects of the movie that are almost word for word from the book or scene for scene from the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like Heinlein was trying to say something with that book that gets cut. Well,
It
I
gets
think I
lost
don't
in the
know.
movie.
It gets lost in the movie because of the spectacle of the movie, but like the whole recruiter and the citizenship through service and the I don't know. I feel like he was asking questions that people often lose from the movie.
Yeah,
It's a good
but
book. I think
the
it's
book
The book
changed.
is not an action book. It's
no.
not. It's not like not like Drop Trooper or Armor or any of those. It is. It is a political treatise.
Yeah.
Right.
It's told in the life of this one kid. It's it's not something you would read for the explosions or anything. It's political theory. It's Heinlein saying, what if we built a society this way? What would it
Yeah.
be like?
For sure. No, and really the only reason I bring it up is because there's some things that happen in the movie, at least during their training, that affect what happens later on, and it also before they join it, they're setting up things that happen later on. So if you're doing something like that in your story, then I could see it working well and necessary. If I ever use anything like a basic training setting in my books, it's like he remembered in training when he was doing this and his
Right.
instructor was pounding into his head, do
I
this,
actually
do
think
this,
I
or
have a
whatever it
scene like
is.
that too, where Jacob remembers something about the training. I didn't really want to go into it just because like my main character is an officer.
Hmm.
I can't think of anything more boring than officer training school.
I don't know about that. I mean, AIT, yeah. Sorry, not. I mean, regular officers training, yeah. But I did have a scene in Drop Trooper 3 where he is in OCS.
Right.
Yeah, I had a section in OCS, and I thought that it made a difference to how you viewed the whole Marine structure that they were fighting in.
So
And
the thing that I liked about the way you did that in OCS, which Jeff, as enlisted, I think because both enlisted and having gone through, however the U.S. Army thinks it should train officers in the ROTC program, like the way that they pit you against each other and the way that you are constantly being rated, and that's just a thing that as enlisted you don't necessarily experience. And a lot of enlisted soldiers wonder, like, why do officers all hate each other? It's because you're trained to do it from the beginning. Like if you don't, and you express, I mean, I had a really good buddy when I went through what they call advanced camp back at the time, and he's from University of Mississippi. I want to say, like, maybe he was a good soldier, would have been a good soldier. And then this dirtbag from University of Rochester that I had to, like, I made his bunk for him, which was probably a mistake, but he was just a complete dirtbag, and for whatever reason they were pushing him through, and he kept getting good ratings from the instructors, and this other guy that I felt would be a good soldier. And so I don't know, there's just things like that I think it actually could be valuable to tell that. And Rick
it is
touches
very,
on that.
very much, especially in ROTC. I don't know about West Point or OCS as much. Well, I know a little bit of OCS because I have a close friend who went through it. But in ROTC, it is very much whether your instructor likes you determines whether you have a career in the Army. It's very unfair.
College
Or
is
it
like
was
that,
anyway,
too.
but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, but I think that's where a training situation like that can definitely set things up for later on, especially if you're trying to explain like neuroses people have or why why they are the way they are. But I think that's where, and that's actually, thinking about that, it's not a thing that you see that often, which is why I kind of enjoyed that in Drop Trooper, because you didn't, and you also got to see the enlisted, he goes in with the enlisted mindset and he really struggles with having to transition that to the officer mindset. And I felt that was using training and he also struggled with, he had combat experience. And because not to say that I had combat experience when I went to ROTC, but I felt like ROTC was just all BS because like, this is stupid. I've already done all this. Why do I have to do this again? You people are stupid. You don't know. Go read this manual. This tells you how to do it.
You're stupid.
Yeah. and I basically got told, like, Rick, kind of what you're talking about. Like, an NCO pulled me aside and he's like, you need to shut up and do what you're told, or you're not going to succeed here. And I don't care that you already know more. And
Not
that's
about
a lesson
knowing
in
more.
itself. Like, shut up and do what you're told, or you're not going to succeed. Salute the flagpole, eat your crayons.
I
Um,
wish I wish in my time in the military, I wish I could have wrapped my head around that idea. Have a very strong independent streak in me, and
mhm.
So the military is just perfect for you then.
yeah, it really was. And I'm always like thinking about how to do things better or different, or how you could change it so that it'd be. And man, it's just like I just had the totally wrong mindset. If you're going in the military, if you're watching this for some reason and you're going in the military and you're a kid, your job is not to find a better way to build the mousetrap. Your job is to build the mousetrap exactly as the manual says to build the mousetrap, and that's it. And don't even suggest that you might know a better way to build a mousetrap.
Well, there is a certain
Not the
logic
point.
to that in that you're dealing with an army that's hundreds of thousands of people.
Oh yeah.
And if you don't do things the same way somebody else would do them, then if they have to replace you when you get killed, or if they get put in there after you're shipped out, then they may not know how to
Yeah. Oh yeah.
rebuild what you did.
No, the army was right. I was wrong. And it's just that, when you're a kid, you have a hard time,
Right.
Well, there is though. I mean, I ran into this when I was and later on in my service, and also in my friends and relatives. There's a huge difference between peacetime army and wartime army.
And I was a peacetime army.
Peacetime army, everything is doctrine, everything is the book, everything is the manual, and you practice by the manual. You do everything, whether it makes sense or not.
Yeah.
You do everything by the book. Like we were doing a company level defense when I was in the 25th Infantry Division, and the place where we were set up, there was this big stand of tall grass that went right through our lines. And I told the company commander and the battalion commander were there, and I was like, "Hey, sir, maybe we got concertina wire. Maybe we should put some in this tall grass so they can't come right through our lines." And the battalion commander says, "Oh no, because we don't have it under direct fire observation, and the manual says you have to have it under direct fire observation." And I'm like, "But they're gonna come right up that tall grass and flank us. I mean, get right." And that's what they did when the Australian OPFOR came up. They went right up the tall grass and they flanked us, and we got our asses kicked because you couldn't break doctrine and put an obstacle down, or mines, but in this case, an obstacle down without it being under direct fire observation. When you go into war, all that goes out the window. You do what doctrine says, except if it doesn't make sense, and then you do what makes sense. And I hated that.
Well, I think, and that's a good point about training too. And I think what Jeff is saying, and these are all character traits. Jeff is a character. No, but that kind of interaction, that Rick is going through, like, that's a really great way to set up, like, here's a character that saw a problem, sees a way to fix it. And that sort of you're always going to have that drama between, an older officer or leader who thinks they know the right way to do things, and then the younger leader. And I don't know, training is a good way to set that up. So that exact kind of scene, because then you can take that character and put them later on in a thing where they can make a different decision, or maybe they could, if you really want to teach them something, like a combined decision, like we're going to put the concertina wire out and we're going to figure out how to get direct fire on that location, or whatever. But I think that's the kind of thing that all the stuff we've been talking about, like showing growth, putting people in complex situations, having to solve a problem together. And I mean, doctrine exists for a reason. So sometimes you have to think like, okay, why did somebody decide to make this doctrine? And I don't want to completely throw it out the window, but it's cool when a character can integrate what they learned and use it in the new situation, right? Because nothing's ever the same as what they're gonna see. And so I don't know. I think training is just a cool way to set that up. And readers like to, I don't know, I enjoy reading about that and seeing it when people, like, when you've got a character that uses tools they learned and can twist the tool to do something new and interesting. Like, I love that stuff.
Well, it's almost like a great example of if you're not trying to do like a basic training sequence, if you're looking at like maybe just a setup training sequence, like the Kobayashi Maru sequence in Star Trek, where he's faced with a thing and he cheats and he gets in trouble, and they're like, that's not the point of the exercise, and blah blah blah. And then later on in the movie, it comes back and that particular instance plays a major role in how they solve the situation that they're in. That kind of thing is really fun to do.
Yeah.
Give me motion sickness, Jeff.
Sorry. I don't have a
Yeah, so I
death.
mean, training is basically like built-in foreshadowing, I guess, is a way to look at
Yeah,
it.
true. Very true.
And I had Jacob. Jacobs was more of a Annapolis style officer where he went out of high school. He went to the academy because um his mother was in the Navy and she won the Medal of Honor basically, so kind of guaranteed his ticket into the academy. And so I had a draft where I went through like the academy with him, well, an outline anyways, and I just realized I was like, that's not really the story I want to tell. Could be a fun story, especially if you follow a character from like their first day in the academy all the way to the first time they command a ship. That could be a fun story. That just wasn't the story I wanted to tell.
I did something like that in Glory Boy, with Cal Mitchell. He enlisted. He got into the academy because of his test scores. He was like on this small ag planet, but he got into the academy, and I based it a lot on what I knew about the Air Force Academy from when I was trying to get in. But I went through a lot of that academy stuff. Especially, I found the academy classes that they were having a good way to introduce the backstory of the universe, like the political organizations of the planet, the history, as well as the enemy. I having them have to sit in on a class is a good way to introduce that without it being an info dump.
Right. Well, it is an info dump, but it's in a way that people expect it. Yeah.
So I found that I actually liked writing that better than I liked doing the basic training stuff from Drop Trooper, because basic training at its core, really you're learning the how to fight, whereas in the academy, they're teaching you the why of everything, because they're basically trying to educate future generals, and senior officers. So you need to know the 30,000 foot view of all the political and military goings on, which I found helped inform that universe without having to make it like 10 books. Yeah.
Right.
And also he was in a training mission for the academy when he winds up being ambushed by the enemy, and that sets up the whole story.
It's always fun. Josh, your Valor guys were more of special forces. Did you ever do anything with special forces school?
No. I mean, I did some training on the bomb squad with the SWAT team. We did a lot of close quarters, like internal breaching, like a lot of that kind of tactical stacking and movement that special forces do. But I was not special forces in the military.
No, I mean your Valor guys, the guys.
Yeah.
In the book, did you do anything like that?
I did. I did some. I did some kind of training, but it was more like you would run a rehearsal for a hit or a mission or something like that. It wasn't actually like they were in training doing it, but they were, training themselves, like the ongoing training. I like kind of like the Kobayashi Maru thing. I like to set things up in the mission when they go sideways to give them to foreshadow that a little bit in training. So when they come up with a plan in the middle of everything, it's not like a Deus Ex Machina where they're like, oh, let's do this, but something if you can set up either a failure or a kind of a unintended thing that happens in training, they can kind of use that in the real world scenario. They already have the background knowledge, which they probably would anyway, but this just gives the reader that kind of anchor point to say, oh yeah, this just didn't come out of nowhere. I can see where this came from.
I actually did that with the last two books. They were kind of a two-parter, a Grim Decision Grim Decision and Traditions of Courage. In the beginning of Grim Decision, they're doing a training exercise, and the way Jacob loses the training exercise is the way he wins the final battle.
Right. That's right. I remember that.
And it's good to bring that together because it bookends it, you know, so people feel like even if they don't realize that the ending and the beginning are matched.
You know, now you bring up the training scenario. One thing that I absolutely hate, and can usually see coming, is the switch in, like, you start off a scene and they're going through and they're like getting completely wiped out, and
Star
then,
Trek 2,
well, it's
like in the
like,
beginning when the bridge crew's getting killed and you know the
yeah, yeah,
explosion.
yeah. And then they're like, oh, exercise over at the
Yeah.
end. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. Like, there's not really any need to do that. Like, obviously, they're just, you know, in most cases, you're trying to set up tension and going, you know, what's going on? And then up, training over. And I don't know. I hate that bait and switch uh, trope, if you will, in that particular situation.
Especially when
But
you realize that you're kind of wondering if this is going to be it.
yeah,
Realize, because you come into it, you know the characters don't have any of this stuff yet, right? You know this guy's not a
Yeah.
captain. You know this isn't that, and then also like just more and more bad, you know, attacks
Yeah.
come in. You're like, wait, what? Wait a
yeah,
second.
Are you gonna
right,
blow the ship up on the first chapter? What's going on
right.
here?
Yeah,
The
Yeah,
main
I
character
don't like
gets
that.
shot and
I
you're
agree
like,
with Josh. I don't like that either. That's I think it's cheap.
Actually, it's so funny is when I was writing Grim Decision in the beginning, that first chapter, I had two versions of that. One was where you knew it was a training exercise, and one was where you didn't. And I didn't go with the one where you didn't know for that very specific reason, that it felt like a letdown. So instead I went with, you knew it was a training exercise right from the moment it started. It just was a really important training exercise, but also it highlighted Jacob's dislike of losing an exercise, where not because he lost the exercise, but because technically he won it, but he lost half his command doing it.
yeah,
He
well,
felt like
that
there
brought
should
up
be a better way to do it, you know.
that
right.
one in
I
particular. I felt pointed out an important thing about Jacob's character, because he knows ultimately the right answer is to pull everybody out, but he also knows that he's playing a game, and he has to play the game in the way that command wants. So I thought there was a lot of interesting things happening there with the character that I thought worked really well. And then, you know, the fact that it comes into play later when he has to make a similar decision was just even because as the reader, it kind of creates a tension that keeps you reading, because you're like, oh, the author has done this. This is cool. I want to see, like, if they're good. If they're not good, they're probably going to like drop it and pretend it never happened. But that's not what happened here.
That does happen a lot.
And so that it was cool to see that come into play. But then also, I don't know, having people like, he had set the officers up because he taught them. Like, that's the other thing. That piece was not withholding information, which I think is kind of the general thing with when you go into a fake training exercise, you're withholding information from the reader, and you want the reader to, like, at least in my opinion, be there with the character, like struggling with the character, knowing what the character knows. When you withhold information from the reader, then if something happens to the character, they don't know why, and it's not as satisfying, you know. And training should set things up so they understand why, you know, they know what the character knows, they know why the character makes the decisions they do, or why they've been trained to react the way they do. And I thought that was a good thing too later, because after that thing, there's a bit of like a falling action where all the officers get pulled together to explain why that decision was made. And that was something you don't often see. And that's something that, you know, Rick does a lot too, where the decision, like why the decisions are made, is explained. And I think that's an important piece of it too, that often comes into play later in the story.
The one
I
scene
think
that I want to write that I actually got from a podcast, and I can't remember which podcast it was, but this guy was talking to he was a special forces operator, and I can't remember what unit he was trying to get into, but they were going through assessment and selection, and uh this particular guy he was going through an obstacle course or something, right? And there was a guy there. His instructors were observing, obviously, and then there was another guy there that was basically talking shit to the guy. And then he starts, talking stuff to the guy, and then he starts like chipping his teeth back at him, like, who are you? Like, get out of here, you're nobody, blah 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 blah. And then when it comes to the selection board, the dude is the highest ranking officer on the selection board that he was talking junk to during the deal. And it was all like, it worked out, right? He found it funny and everything like that. But the guy had kind of an oh crap moment when he walks in and sees this guy in uniform and sees him sitting there as head of the selection committee going, I just completely ruined my shot at getting in the unit because I was talking junk to this guy on the obstacle course. I thought it was a pretty interesting story. I haven't found a place to use
I
it
like
yet.
that. Yeah.
But it does give a little bit of view into the guy's character, and then also the guy that he didn't know, who's the highest ranking guy. It shows that he's not a complete douchebag and can take a joke.
It's one thing I'd like to write that I have not is
Complete douchebag.
is some sort of special forces like selection course type of scene or section. The closest I came in was in Glory Boy, and that wasn't really selection because they were all already selected. They were declared dead and put in this special thing where they were all given surgeries that cost more than a cruiser, so nobody was going to get washed out. I'd like to do like a special forces selection style segment in a book, futuristic book.
One thing I want to point out to anybody who's considering being an author, what James was saying about doing the bait and switch and withholding information. The very last thing, there's two things that you absolutely don't want to be as an author. You don't want to be boring, and you don't want to be confusing. If people are bored, they stop reading your book, and if they're confused, they stop reading your book. So be very careful withholding information, and conversely, be very careful giving too much information because that's boring. So it's a line,
TMI.
fine line you gotta walk, and you're the only one who knows how to walk it. You're the one who has to figure out how to walk it. But err on the side of not withholding information from a scene. Don't write a scene without names because you want to be a mystery about who this is. Come up with a name and assign it to them and figure out a way to get the mystery that you want without withholding a name, because that is just really frustrating, especially in opening chapter.
The only time where
why don't I care?
The only time where I've ever found that particular style interesting, I guess you could say, is in some of the Gray Man books. Mark will start either the first chapter or a prologue chapter or something, not using names specifically, and he makes you believe that it's for instance, maybe it's the Gray Man. He makes you believe that it's the Gray Man, and then he gets arrested and gets into prison, and then at the end of the chapter he says the name of the character, so you know that it's not the Gray Man, but the entire time you're reading it you think it's the Gray Man. He doesn't do it very often. He's only done it a couple of times, and sometimes it works, and in this particular case it works just because that's the kind of style of writing that he does. But if you're just doing that, like Jeff said, just because that's the only way you can build tension, it's probably not a good option. The other thing to avoid is, if the characters know something, the reader should know something.
Right.
And if the characters know something and you're not telling the reader, unless it matters, like for instance, if they come up with a plan to kill the bad guy, you could very easily go, I've got an idea, and in the chapter, without going through the idea and then showing that later. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is if the reader or the author or the characters know that who the bad guy is, but we don't want the reader to know who the bad guy is, and you're hiding it from the reader, that's deceptive on the author's part and not interesting.
I just ran into it.
Oh, go ahead, Rick.
I was gonna say, I just ran into a kind of situation where I wanted to change things up because I felt like the final battle or sequence was going to be too predictable. And I thought about doing something where the main character knew but wasn't sharing it with the audience. And I'm like, that's kind of lame. So I put him in a situation where he just didn't have any other choice but to totally change what they were going to do, which was it's cool, but I also hadn't plotted that out. So I kind of like painted myself into a corner. It's like he was supposed to assassinate this guy, this emperor of this alien, kingdom, when he's conspiring with another one of the aliens against him, even though the other alien is evil as well, and he doesn't really want to work with him. And then at the last minute, he realizes that guy's going to double cross him. So he just flat out tells the emperor, "Oh yeah, this guy brought me here to kill you." And I had to get him out of that somehow.
Well, if the character didn't know what he was going to do until he did it, I think the problem with a lot of withholding information and why training, I don't know, TV does it all the time, but you've got a visual medium where you're getting other information about the person doing things, and I think
they're also not in somebody's head on TV,
right?
Yeah,
Right.
And with Mark Greaney, like people trust Mark Greaney that they'll keep reading. Okay, I may not know what the heck's going on, but I'll keep reading because I like Mark Greaney. But we all don't have, not all of us have that luxury of the reader trusting us that much.
For
Or the
sure.
luxury of
Yeah.
having sold 1 million books.
Yeah. Well, and he doesn't overdo it, right?
Yeah.
And the one thing that I don't like that he does in some of his earlier books, and I see this a lot in like thriller suspense type fiction, some MIL sci-fi, but not a lot, is where you write a scene and at the very end of the scene, say your character's in a bar and they leave the bar and the last sentence is, "But he didn't see the assassin lurking in the corner that was following him," or something like that, setting up like some kind of suspenseful deal. Like if the character didn't see it, the character didn't see it.
Right.
And it shouldn't be in the book. If you're writing first person or third person, you're typically writing from the perspective of that character. And so if that character didn't see the person in the bar, putting it in there is kind of like a red herring or something. I think just, I don't know. It doesn't work for me.
Certainly
I guess it
shouldn't
could
do
work for
it
some
first
people.
person, because when you do first person, you should be in first person.
Yeah.
While there are some authors who switch back and forth between first and third throughout their book, the general rule of thumb is you stay in first person throughout the whole book. In third person, there are ways to slip into omniscient where it works. There's ways to change perspectives, within a paragraph or within a page.
I disagree.
Um,
I don't
but-
agree that it works.
No, it absolutely works. I mean, you may not like it, but it absolutely works and is used by mainstream authors, and it is quite successful.
And Frank Herbert,
And it's not head hopping. Head hopping.
Frank Herbert wrote his books like 60 years ago.
Frank Herbert wrote Omniscient. That's different. Frank Herbert wrote Omniscient, where it is the perspective is everybody all the time. Their narrator knows all. There is a narrator, and he could dip into any. That's just not a style anybody uses anymore.
No,
But
I don't agree that it works when you go from one POV to another in the same paragraph. I think it's confusing as hell.
It's called passing the baton.
Yeah, in one paragraph, in the same paragraph, that's
Okay,
that's
so let me
confusing.
set up. No, it's not, because that's why it's called passing the baton. There's a technique for this that is wildly used throughout
Wildly?
fiction. Yeah, widely.
widely.
And that is, as in Josh's example, as the main character is leaving the bar, he bumps into somebody, and from that moment on, you're in the perspective of the person he bumped into.
So it's like playing tag.
It's called
No,
passing.
I understand I can see what you're saying, where you have a direct shift from the main character to another character, and the reader knows that the other character is hunting the main character, right? What I'm talking about is not a shift. What I'm talking about is the line would be, and Jeff walked out the bar but never saw the guy sitting in the back
And you're talking
corner.
about switching into omniscient. I'm just saying there's a way to achieve that goal
for sure,
while doing it in a way that makes sense and the reader understands.
Yes.
The only time I ever switch into omniscient, and I do use omniscient, because space battles would be really boring without omniscient.
That is true. That is true.
I think you can make a interesting space battle without you going to omniscient. It just takes a lot of different POVs.
Well,
Mm.
and
You have to switch back
I've
and
read
forth.
Space Battles, like Josh Dazelle doesn't do Omniscient. I've read Space Battles that are, they manage to bring tension into staring at a screen. That's not my preferred. I like talking about the weapon systems and the math involved and things like that. Kind of lean toward more David Weber's style than Josh's. And Josh is a fabulous writer. If you've never read The Black Fleet, I highly recommend it. It is an
Super nice guy too.
excellent series. Oh yeah, really nice guy. Black Fleet's probably one of my favorite space series. But there is a way to achieve all of these goals and to do it in a way that makes absolute sense within the story. And this is where reading a lot comes into play, is that you people think, I know, like you go on Facebook on any writers group and you say like, oh, hey, I changed POV in this chapter or in this paragraph. They're like, oh, no head hopping. And you're like, that's like when people say, oh, starting the action, and they think it means combat or explosions.
Right.
They don't realize action means tension.
Intrigue. Start with intrigue.
Yeah. And it's just it's 101 and we're talking 301. There are ways to achieve goals to ramp up that tension, to bring in another character at the end of a story, or to get a POV from another character briefly without it interrupting the flow.
One of the examples that I can think of what you're kind of describing, Jeff, when you're talking about going to Omniscient, especially for like naval fleet battles or something like that, it reminds me of what Tom Clancy used to do in his ship battles, where he's talking about, they would fire the torpedo and they would be in the, the con of the submarine. They'd fire the torpedo, and then Clancy would describe where the torpedo hit and what pieces of equipment it damaged and how those pieces damaged other pieces or whatever else. And that's kind of a shift into Omniscient, because the characters wouldn't see that. They might not even know that was the exact damage that the weapon did. But
you could also have it from the character's point of view when they find out the damage for what it did to their ship, like, hard a port, like, I can't. Oh
yeah, no, sure, yeah.
What do you call it? Jammed.
It just depends. Like Jeff said, it just kind of really depends on the story that you're writing. Are you writing the story where the people are wanting to see the damage as it happens, or are you writing a story where you're just going to take into account the damage after the fact? But I think you could do it both ways, and you would not be wrong.
Well, no, I don't think you can't do it the way Jeff says. I'm just saying, when you say, Jeff, that it's the only way to make a space battle exciting, I think you can make it exciting from inside the ship as well.
Okay, well, let me rephrase. I find space battles more exciting in a book when there's an omniscient point of view for the battle itself.
But one of the ways that you amp up that tension too is with training scenes.
Yeah.
To tie it back to training.
Yeah. That's what we were talking about.
But I mean, that is
I love when our show goes off the rails.
Well, but it's a problem, right? Like, how do I make people in metal tubes, millions of miles apart? Like, how do I create tension around that, right? When they got to shoot something based on math and then wait and see if they get killed or not. Like, so
that's when you change your technology and make it so you don't shoot things that are, an hour before they get hit.
But these are all the ways that, really effective. And that's why military sci-fi is special this way, I think, because you have to set up this whole puzzle box to make it work. And if there are ways to do it that are boring or don't, like, it's hard to say that it's reality, but you're doing your best to make it adhere to an understanding of what reality could be like in that situation. But from the very beginning of the story, like, it's being set up, and training is a great way to do that. So
you need to make a pledge now to do an episode in the future just on how to write space battles.
Maybe. I know.
Oh, but there's so many different ways you could do it. Like, I like to think of, in terms of actually writing, taking the stuff that either you have been trained to do, or even just researching how other people were trained to do things and incorporating that into your writing. And it gives it a little bit more credibility in terms of
for sure,
how you present. I mean, you might not have been trained how to do like, I don't know, uh, extravehicular activity while you're breaching a starship hull in zero G with no atmosphere, but you
You
can
weren't trained how to
definitely.
do that?
No, I missed that.
Damn,
I was
man.
sick that day. I
And
was
that
sick
was
that
an
day.
that was an optional course in basic, man.
Yeah. But you can definitely research ways that like naval ship breaching actions work and then extrapolate your information from there. I know that I've taken a lot of my bomb training and used that in terms of explosives and even breaching, just in terms of how it's done. And there's a lot of good resources out there uh, to learn about a specific thing that you're trying to do, and just instead of just trying to come up with, the scene out of whole cloth, you can get a lot of good ideas by just kind of extrapolating real world training or real world examples of that
Right.
work.
And the
Training is
last
still
thing,
training. Describe the thing, do the thing, correct the thing.
And if you really want to encapsulate military training, you have to have a PowerPoint, and that PowerPoint has to
Yes.
have every single word that the instructor says on a line in the PowerPoint, so the instructor can read the PowerPoint.
And also, if it ain't raining, it ain't
Stomp,
training.
and
That's
stomp
right.
their foot whenever you
also, if you're
remember
an
something.
author and you're instructing somebody how to do something with a PowerPoint, make sure you read your PowerPoints verbatim.
Yes.
That is always keeps the audience engaged, where they
Which
read it up there and then they just have to listen to you drone on about the exact same thing they just read.
brings up a good point
100%.
actually, is there is bad training and there is training that is wrong, or there is training that you might have been trained to do it one way, and then we kind of touched on this. You have to take that base of what it is and realize I need to change this and do it differently. But I've sat through plenty of terrible training in my life, with bad trainers who didn't care, and that's part of the experience too, right? Like,
Oh,
I
they
think,
certainly cared when I fell asleep.
yeah,
Yeah.
I made a point in Drop Trooper about officers training that I don't think gets ever brought up in military science fiction, and I thought it was kind of funny. When his commanding officer asked him what the most valuable classes he got in
oh right,
OCS were, and he was like, finances, how to invest my money and have like a life after the military. Because I have no idea. I was a street kid in the in the underground of the city, you know.
I used to love we would get training in special security forces on things that we would never do. And if we did them, then like we knew that, like if we got deployed and we went into a combat situation, we would get way more training than this one PowerPoint hour-long presentation they're giving us. So why are you giving us this PowerPoint presentation about advancing or like patrolling or L ambushes or whatever it is? Because we don't need that here. Why are we getting the training now? And there seems to be a lot of training in the military that's like that, where they have to fill time slots, and so they train you on stuff that you
Hell
actually
yeah.
need to
Comes out
know.
like
You know, we used to do in ROTC when we had time and nothing else to do. They would go over Zodiac training. Zodiac is little rubber boats.
Right.
Like we'd be going over amphibious operations. We're in ROTC. What do we need to know about Zodiac training?
100%. Yeah.
I know one time when I was in a commo unit and they pulled us out of like maintenance stuff, and they took us out of the field. Like, well, battalion wants us to all do camouflage training today, so the whole battalion's doing camouflage training today because the battalion commander wants to come out and see everybody in camo and faces painted up and take some pictures and blah blah blah. And I'm just like, I'm a radio operator and I've got 15 radios that need to be fixed.
Right.
Not a valuable use of my time.
It's actually a really interesting use of a training scenario in writing, if you can point to the just legitimate like craziness that is the military, because there's so many things that are done in the military that are just for somebody to make somebody happy, and it has no
Right.
real bearing on your preparation for war or anything like that.
Well, that's a big thing too, is the difference. I like pointing it out, and I like when other people do, is the difference between the peacetime and the wartime military, and how you're in war and you're in training and they're training you for all the crap that you would get in a peacetime military, and it's totally worthless.
Or they're worried about how polished your boots are on on a training where you're going to go out and do patrolling in a field somewhere. And I'm like, why would I polish my boots? We're going to be walking through mud.
That's what I said.
I need
And
a
you know what
reason
the
to
answer
judge you,
was?
Troop. Do you
You
do
were
what you're
private.
told? Do you
Yeah.
use the crayons like you're told?
Uh-huh.
Didn't have crayons when I was in. That wasn't a thing.
That's a Marine thing. You would,
I know. Well, shut up
You
and
know,
color
things
is what
in
we were
Marines,
always
and I don't know
told.
when it started, but it started sometime in the last 20 years. But I was in the 90s, and that was the thing. Marines are just jarheads.
Yeah.
We knew
We-
not to fight with
color.
fights with jarheads. We knew that. Do not get, because you mess with one jar, you get the entire case.
Uh-huh.
Hmm. Well, yeah. I
So
never
many
ran into
absolute
Marines when I was in Hawaii. It's weird because they're up there at Kaneohe, but we never mixed. Never saw one.
Yeah, I ran into Marines a bunch in training, and I love the guys. The big lugs. They're just weapon systems, and you point them in the direction you need the weapon system to go.
Hmm.
So I have a lot of respect for Marines.
I mean, I met smart Marines. We had a thing called a
They had little
tropospheric
chips in their
shot.
heads, and they knew where to go.
Yeah, I mean, we used for the Patriot emplacements between batteries, we had a good, 100 kilometers between two locations, and we ran our comms across a tropospheric shot that the Marines set up. So those were smart Marines. They could point the dishes the right way and turn it on, set elevation.
I did run into something really funny recently. I was watching this podcast, and this guy was being interviewed, and he was a Marine. He was a colonel. I think he was in charge of Marine recruitment, and he was asked why the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy are having so much trouble meeting the recruiting goals, but the Marines weren't. And he said, if you look at the Marine recruiting, the amount of Marines that get recruited every year, they stay pretty much relatively the same, and has since World War II. And he's like, because when you join the Marines, you're not joining the Marines on a whim. You're doing it because you want to do things the hardest way possible with the least reward. And that takes a special kind of person. And whereas people who join the Air Force or the Army or the Navy, they have a goal, they want to make money or they want to get free college or whatever. He's like, you join the Marines because you want a hard life. And those people join regardless of what's going on. I thought that was really interesting.
Well, they also, I mean, talk about withholding information. They don't lie in their recruiting materials. Like the
Right.
Army just recently has had to come back around to, like, we want to do cool stuff. We don't, I mean, yeah, the touchy feely things are fine, but like, show me jumping out of planes and
Oh, finally, yeah, right. The My Two Moms debacle.
yeah, I mean, that's
Well, and I think, like I said at the beginning, all the services have different aspects of basic that they do very well, and you're going to be more challenged, say physically, if you go to the Marine boot camp than when you go to the Air Force boot camp. You know,
I have a friend who gained weight at Air Force boot camp.
Air Force boot camp was not hard, but I mean, when you look at it like objectively, basic training in any circumstance is really not hard. It's mental. It's pushing yourself through. It's convincing yourself to do it. Sure, if you can't,
Guy who went through the Air Force training,
you're going to have a bad time. But they're all pretty similar. But if you're writing a specific one, you may want to do research on what makes that particular training course stand out from the other services, because while they do a lot of similar things, the way they do it is oftentimes different. And, the amount of whatever running, if you're a Marine, you're going to run all the time. If you're an Air Force guy, you're like me, you're going to run a little bit for PT in the morning, and then you're done. You do whatever, 2-3 miles, and then you're done. But if you're a Marine, you're running all the time. Yeah. Oh, it was great. People talk crap on me all the time because I went to Air Force Basic, and I'm like, hey, I got paid the same as you, man. And I had great chow and great
Air conditioning,
bunks and air conditioning. And
I never complained about the Army chow and basic. I thought the Army chow and basic was really good. It was when I got to my duty station that I hated the chow there because it was just 19 different kinds of chicken and veal,
and overcooked most of the time.
Yeah,
veal cutlet.
And now to this day, 25 years later, I can't stand chicken. I don't like eating it. I don't get it at fast food restaurants. My wife buys a lot of chicken for my kids and stuff, but I'll pass. I don't even like chicken soup.
I think one of the interesting things that I took away from my training, that basic training in tech school, it didn't really have anything to do with military service. It didn't have anything to do with what the military taught me to do. It had to do with the fact that after I got done with basic and tech school, I could no longer sit and eat like a normal person. I had to eat as fast as I could. I
Oh
was
yeah.
always the first one
Right.
done. And you would think after whatever 20, 30, 20 years later that I would be able to sit down at a table and eat and just take a bite, sit, chill,
Nope.
have a conversation. No, I'm like spoon shoveling it into my
You
mouth.
never get over that.
Yeah,
You
it's
never
so
get over that.
crazy.
I
So
had
crazy.
some serious digestive issues because of that, and I've had to really retrain myself really difficultly. And the moment I stop thinking about it, I'm like,
Right.
Yeah,
I gotta
Yeah.
consciously think about it when I eat. Like, stop.
I'm
It's your
exactly
food.
the same way. I think it must be nearly universal to anybody who did anything even remotely combat related, in the military, is you wolf down your food as quick as you can because you don't know if you have time to finish it.
Yep.
I I work for a university housing now, and so one of the benefits is we get to eat in the cafeterias for super cheap, but you got to wait in line with the students, and they sit there and oh, what's that? That looks good. Oh, what does that look like? Huh? I mean, I'm ranting a little bit, but sometimes you just wish they had like a drill sergeant behind them, like get
Yeah.
back, get back,
Yeah.
put it on your plate, get out. You know,
Go,
and
go.
I realized like
Yeah.
how much like I just get visibly like physically irritated while
One thing I never did get, I mean, some people got this when they're in the military, and I envy them, is the ability to sleep anywhere at any time. Some
Yeah.
people could do that. They could just like fall asleep. I can't do that.
I can do
I've-
that.
Slept in the front of a Humvee once with full
Dude,
combat gear
Humvee
on.
sleeping is the best sleeping I've ever got. Like the
So-
sound, the motion, just everything
I
just
almost
knocks
somebody
me out.
posted like locally a Humvee for $7,000, and I was gonna like as a joke post it on Facebook and like, hey, look, it's a new, it's the greatest bed
Airbnb.
I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
And I was like, people aren't gonna understand what I'm talking about.
Oh no,
Veterans
man.
would.
Yeah. I mean, you
I'd
put
sleep
on
in
your
the front of
helmet
the
and you put your
yeah.
helmet up
Yeah,
against
and
the
you just-
door and you're just
I was
Oh
leading
my
a convoy
gosh,
once.
bringing back so many memories.
I know, it's so crazy.
I was leading a
I could never do
convoy
that.
out in like North Fort Bliss at 3 a.m, and I just kept falling like I just could not stay awake in the Humvee. It just kept putting me out, and I'd wake up, the driver would ask me where to turn, that way. But
All the little
one thing I
lights in
wanted
front
to
of
touch
you.
on before we leave it is also I think the thing we've kind of talked about all these like ways you have to change yourself in training, but training is also a great way to introduce lots of different characters into a situation, which is one of the biggest takeaways for me personally from basic training was all the different people from across the United States that I had to learn to interact with, and people I never would have met in my life until I went to basic training. And it's a big part of that whole military experience. And so for me, that's one of the cool things about it. And training is a good opportunity to put all those people together, get them to interact and like mold that team together, which is the thing that I like to see. Like or it's gratifying for me in a story. Like it doesn't necessarily all have to happen in basic training or a training situation, but I love seeing that group of people thrown together, that learns to do things they normally wouldn't do, like eat fast and get up when they're supposed to, and, deal with sleep deprivation and just learn to listen when, because most people in their lives, like there's a reason the Claymore says this side toward enemy. Like most people are too dumb to pay attention. They don't pay attention, or school doesn't matter, or the things you're learning, they really don't matter unless you're excited about it in some way. And you go into military training and like, depending on what it matters. And if you do it wrong, you're going to die. Other people are going to die.
Yeah.
You're not going to accomplish the mission. But when you're a soldier, like all you really care about is like, is this going to kill me or not? And you're doing stuff that could kill you. Like you're throwing grenades. I mean, I remember the first time when this is something drill sergeants did a pretty good job of, of like, you are holding a thing that if you drop it, it will kill you. And you're going to go do this. And it felt like you start seeing the light come on in people's eyes. Like, holy crap, this is a thing that is serious. This is serious
Man, I
business.
loved Grenade Day.
Yeah. Oh, I did.
It was
I
a lot
mean,
of fun.
I ran a grenade range in Germany, and that was I mean, a lot of stuff. This is a thing that I didn't.
Nice.
Nice. I mean,
That's
I got
the
to
one
go
that I
back.
through. That's the grenade that I threw. I've
Kept
kept
it
it.
in?
They
Yeah,
had you
this is
keep it.
I put it in my pocket after I threw the grenade
Yeah.
and held
Love
on to it.
that.
I guess I feel like because I got to run a CS chamber, and then we also
Wow.
ran a grenade range. We did claymores as like secondary to the grenade range, and so like
I
a lot of
hated
that
the
stuff.
CS chamber.
Well, the funny thing was, like, the more I was around it, the less it did affect me. And so it really made me understand how, because I had a terrible experience the first time I went through the chamber. Like, I thought my face was going to melt off. And then after we'd done it for a week, it was kind of like, oh well. But even
I
that,
loved
like,
it.
as I advanced in my career, like a lot of things I'd experienced as a private who'd never done that stuff before. And then I go back and I'm responsible for it as like a lieutenant and then a captain. Um, that was personal growth for me, but I can see those things being in a story, you know, milestones for a character as they advance as well. But
I one of the best days in basic training for me was the CS chamber.
mhm.
And the reason why is there was this bully in my unit, my platoon, and he was relentlessly a bully. And I didn't want to start anything or end anything, because that was my usual MO in high school. Was somebody would bully me, I just beat the crap out of them and they'd leave me alone. And I'm 6'4", so it was your fault for bullying me in the first place. But I didn't want to cause any trouble for the drill sergeants, because that's how you stand out. You don't want to stand out. And so we're in the CS chamber, and they take your mask off, and recite your social security number or sing happy birthday or whatever it was they had us do. And then okay, you can leave now, and we're gonna leave in an orderly. And the words weren't even out of his mouth when this guy just bolted for the door.
Nice.
The drill sergeant grabbed him by his mole, picked him up, slammed him on the ground, and pulled his mask off. He says, "You're last." And I was just like, yes, he's a coward. I knew it.
Poetic justice.
Yeah.
Don't get a lot of that, but that was one. So training, great opportunity for all kinds of awesome stories.
It is,
I look forward to seeing everybody's training scenario down the road.
And if you had one that you maybe we haven't talked about, that I mean, I would love to hear naval story. Like, I don't know, we tend to be pretty Army Air Force focused because that's what we know, but I'd love to hear more about, naval stories or Space Force. I want to hear some Space Force training stories.
Oh my God.
Your
They
Halo
have
jump.
Space Force basic training?
I don't know, man.
From the other units.
I don't think, yeah, I guess that is, I don't know. Honestly, I should get educated on that.
Josh is checking.
I'm
I know.
checking.
But yeah, so there's some stories. Get on our Discord. They'll be linked down below. Don't
Yep.
forget to hit the like and subscribe button, please. We need more subscribers.
And
Share.
tell people about the podcast.
You need more likers.
We need more likers, liking the liking.
Yeah.
It's
No lichens.
yeah, Space Force does have a basic military training.
You
It's
can
a space-
actually join the Space Force now straight up.
You can straight up enlist in the Space
Well,
Force.
yes, but it looks like it's at Lackland, so it's basically Air Force basic. It's 7.5 weeks long.
Such
It
a
looks
mistake.
like it's basically Air Force.
You have to run, but it's in zero gravity.
right.
I just want you to know, Josh, that I ran 8 to 10 miles a day in Army basic training.
No.
So when you say basic training is basically easy, speak for the chair force.
ran in
Mine
boots.
was.
Like my feet are still messed up because of the running in boots. Like, who runs in boots? Why would
When I started college, because I did this competition team where we ran in boots with packs and stuff.
right?
When I started college, I wore a 9.5. When I got out of college, I wore 11.5 wide.
You just flatten your feet out.
Uh-huh.
All right, everybody, you have a
All
great
right.
day.
Well, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see y'all later. Yeah, we all have to salute.
Yeah.
That's our new thing.
All right, Gomer.
Load up, troopers on the hit and jump gate. Military science fiction podcast. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science fiction podcast. Load up, troop, it's time to hit the jump gate. Military science fiction podcast. Reaction to the system on fire. Military science